another time?
We can start now, Mateso. I started recording.
Okay, good. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mateso Bashingwa, PhD student at Anadolu University, Turkey, in the Department of Sociology. I will be your host for today's program. This is discussion series on identity theme that Yumran Academy Research Association has organized with Yumran Women's Magazine. We have discussed in our previous webinars understanding of identity through the novel of Tahmina Anand and the poetry of Chandrika Narayan Mohan. Today, we will have a discussion about Dalit resistance in Malapalli. From that context, today's speaker is Sharonee Dasgupta, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, USA. Sharonee Dasgupta is a second-year PhD student in Department of Anthropology at University of Massachusetts, Amherst. She completed her MPhil in Comparative Indian Literature from the University of Delhi. Prior to joining UMass, she was with the Center for Policy Research in Delhi. She has also worked with several NGOs in Delhi, Bangalore. Her interests include community-based research, cities, species, ethnographic research, mapping, anthropology of development and migration. From that context, we have prepared that through our collaboration with UNARA. UNARA Academic Research Association is academic project of Umran Green Perspective Foundation, funded by Rajiv Kumar. The UNR is inspired by Professor Bruce Lawrence teaching of cosmopolitan spirit based on Balzac logic theory and Umran Green outlook to mean a sustainable approach, value, and respect to the environment and the Baos philosophy. The Quranic word Balzac means divide or barrier. Professor Bruce views it as a civilizational and a life force. He saw Balzac as an essential word, a way to connect all civilizations, peoples, ethnicities, and religions without losing their identity or uniqueness and crucial of anthropis. 8. He defined Balzac as a thin line or interspace that connects two realms without enabling one or diluted or dominated. He calls it Balzac logic. Dear listeners and participants, so today we are going to give the floor to our today's speaker, Sharonee Dasgupta. So we would like to give you the floor. Thank you for listening. And I would like also to tell our participant to mute their microphone and to ask you a question at the time after the presentation of our today's speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mateso, for that introduction. So I'm going to be presenting on Dalit resistance in Malapalli, and this is part of my MPhil dissertation. So this is something that I had written 4 years, almost 6 years back, actually, because I was awarded my MPhil in 2016. And so here I'm going to begin. Indian culture is complex yet diverse. It is a potpourri resultant from influences across time and varied races. It is a huge overplay and crossover of ideas. Indian culture is a comprehensive idea of a pluralistic society. It has its wide display of languages, caste, tribe, and religion. Therefore, India can be called a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and multilingual society with its wide array of religions such as Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism. And also 24 major languages have been recognized by the Indian Constitution, apart from which there are many other languages. Yet poverty, gender discrimination, and caste discrimination, communalism, hierarchy, or offshoots that are both unique and stark realities and stark realities of Indian culture. The constitution of this country was drafted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, is a formidable body of scholarship. It guarantees equal rights to all its citizens. Caste is an important aspect of the Indian culture. Every caste has its own rituals, customs, and deities. As Professor Gurrier points out that caste was considered as central to organized form of division of labor in Aryan society. Gurrier explains caste in India on the basis of 6 distinctive characteristics: segmental division of society, hierarchy, civil and religious disabilities and privileges, lack of unrestricted choice of occupation, restriction on food, drinks, and social intercourse, endogamy. In India, hierarchy has always existed within the family, caste, class structure. People would and are still divided into hierarchies. In the present context as well, social class system seems to be an influencing factor. Firstly, let's look at the origin of the term caste. The term is derived from the Portuguese word casta, meaning race or breed. Caste structure is not based on power, but rather on purity and pollution. The caste system has shaped the Indian society. Caste also determines a person's occupation. A person from a higher caste would not be allowed to socialize or mingle with a person from the lower caste. They were and are still constantly humiliated and kept away from the public activity. Hinduism was based on Varnas. Varna is a Sanskrit word. It is derived from the root VR, meaning to envelope, classify, consider. Varna literally meant division of society, namely Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishya, and Shudra. Brahmins are the priestly class, Kshatriya the warriors, Vaishyas the traders, Shudras the labor. Outside of the Varna system is the 5th caste or Avarna, and hence Dalits and untouchables fall under the category of Avarna. It was in the 1920s, however, that Dalits began to organize strongly and independently throughout many regions of India. The most important of the early Dalit movements were the Adharm movement in the Punjab, which was organized in 1926, the movement under Ambedkar in Maharashtra, mainly based among Mahars, which had its organizational beginnings in 1924, the Nama Shudra movement in Bengal, the Adi Dravida movement in Tamil Nadu, the Adi Karnataka movement, the Adi Hindu movement, mainly centered around Kanpur in Uttar Pradesh, and the organizing of Pulayas and Cherumans in Kerala. Hierarchy within the caste creates inequality. Now, inequality still prevails in the world's largest democracy. After gaining independence almost 2 centuries later from the British rule, the state adopted a democratic form of rule, which includes freedom of speech, equal rights, and to assert justice, secularism, and liberty to all its citizens. Yet discrimination continues in every sphere of the society. There is a contradiction that exists between the modernity that we strive to be and backwardness that continues to prevail in most pockets of our society. Similarly, hierarchy exists between families, where the head of the family is always the man and he's the decision maker. Women have always been denied their position. A person is born into a caste in India, and this determines his or her role, duties, and this continues from generation to generation. Every person is then compelled to perform these tasks. Similarly, women are not seen as contributing members of the society. Thus, a binary relation is born between the self and the other. The process of othering is something that is conditioned by the two. Throughout history, we've seen that Indian social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule, Mahatma Gandhi, and many more who advocated for the equal rights of women and also worked towards their education. Kandukari Veerasalingam started a girls' school in his native town in Andhra Pradesh. Likewise, Raja Ram Mohan Roy started a movement to abolish the sati system, which was still being practiced in West Bengal. A widow should have to immolate herself on her husband's funeral pyre after his death. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar advocated towards girls' education, and Jyotiba Phule was one of the earliest reformers to fight against untouchability. The objective of this proposed research is to understand the power hierarchical structure in the society that is prevalent along with the issues. The objective is to look at Malapalli in respect to the social, political, and economic and gender identity. The study is aimed to understand various portrayal and depiction of conflict, contradiction, and negotiation within a community and with other communities. Malapalli, The Triumph of Sangha, was written by Unnava Lakshmi Narayan, which was published in 1922 as Sangha Vijayam in Telugu. The work is intended to provide a scope to the future researchers an in-depth study on the subject of problems of Dalit in colonial rule. The work also tries to do an in-depth study of caste and village, which are an important part of the Indian society. The literary work was written in 1922, respectively against the nationalist backdrop. Within this span, major movements were being led by social reformers such as Quit India, Non-Cooperation Movement, Salt Satyagraha, Civil Disobedience, and Dandi March. Writers were writing about contemporary issues which affected them and made an impact in the society. The novel is situated in remote villages of southern part of India, and the characters are fighting against the injustices that were being practiced against the common people. It wasn't just the central characters who were revolting, but everyone was part of the revolt. On the surface level, it portrays the society to be glorified without any problems, yet on the other hand, it comes to terms with the age-old practices, the problems. Change was needed to bring about peace in the society. By introducing the central character Sangadas, the writer portrays central characters as somebody who's compassionate, dedicated to bring a change and practice non-violence. After India witnessed the independence movement in 1905, many social reformers and thinkers became a part of this movement, such as Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal. Patriotic poets from Andhra Pradesh influenced people to engage in the movement. The most prominent patriotic poet during the movement was Chilla Kamarthi Lakshmi Narasimha. Chilla Kamarthi sang a verse from his poem to Bipin Chandra Pal during his visit. Bipin Chandra Pal delivered speeches in Andhra Pradesh in April and May 1907, which influenced social and political movements. Anand Mat by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee was one such symbolic work. Historians generally, this has been written by Rama Rao VBB. Historians generally agree that the Vande Mataram movement, which emanated from Bengal, gave a powerful impetus to the growth of prose writing in Telugu. Gradually, patriotism came to be a driving force in Telugu literature. It was the educated people who took the reins of the movement into their hands to lead the nationalist and independence movement. The mass got involved. Freedom fighters and Krantikaris sacrificed themselves to sustain this movement. People understood that education was a significant factor which will give them the power to achieve freedom. During this period, there was a strong flavor of nationalism and patriotism in the writings of many writers. People were becoming aware of the sacrifices that reformers and idealists had made. One such writer who wrote during the movement was Unnava Lakshmi Narayan. Unnava Lakshmi Narayan was one of the foremost writers of Andhra Pradesh during the pre-independence movement. Other writers from the region included Gurajada Apparao, Duvuri Ramareddy, Raya Prolu Subbarao, Vishwanatha Satyanarayan. A refrain from Garimela Satya Narayan's song, We Don't Want This White Rule. In 1900, Unnava Lakshmi Narayan started Young Men's Literary Association in Guntur town. His mother played an important role in shaping his life. She wanted him to get a formal education in English. He was sent to Firangipuram to study English. He was taught English by the Catholics. He went on to complete his school education from Aminabad, Guntur, and Ireland. His novel Malapalli was also set in Guntur district. He was one of the pioneers who proposed a separate state for the people of Andhra Pradesh. The author was deeply inspired by social reformer Kandupuri Veera Salangam. He started a widow's home in his hometown. He then performed a marriage of a widow which outraged the orthodox class. Unnava Lakshmi Narayan believed that the problems of women lay in the fact that they were not given education. Dhondu Keshav Kharve constituted a college for destitute women in Pune. Lakshmi Narayan started Sarada Niketan, a women's college on 24th November 1922 in Guntur. Unnava Lakshmi Narayan was also deeply influenced by Bipin Chandra Pal. He translated speeches of Pal in his text. In the novel Sangadas, the protagonist addresses the Andhra Convention in Bezawara on the issue of untouchability. Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali had addressed the people in Bezawara, and Unnava Lakshmi Narayan attended the meetings. In 1921, the All India Congress Committee met at Bezawara. In Andhra area, the Chirala, Perala incidents protesting against the British rule were led by Dugirala Gopala Krishnaya, who later came to be revered as Andhra Ratna. The same year, the Satyagraha against the tax called Pulari of Palnadu came up. Unnava was its leader. Unnava Lakshmi Narayan was imprisoned in 1921. He fought for the rights of the prisoners. He started writing Malapalli while at prison. Unnava used to dictate it to Pratapagiri Ramamurthy, who wrote it down. Madhabushi used to take the manuscript and make a fair copy of it. Belam Konda Raghava Rao of Pami Di Padu Agraham got it published at his own expense. Ayanki Venkataramayana got the first printed at Andhra Granthalaya Press in the name of Andhra Sahitya Parishad, Bezawara in November-December 1922. The second was printed in February-March of 1923. The first novel in Telugu literature, Rajshekhara Charitra, was written by Kandakuri Veerasalangam. Malapalli is considered to be an epic due to its characters, plot, and theme. The novel, written during the 1920s, tells the story of the untouchable Malas, the British rule, and the judicial system. The main story centers on the basic social contradictions between the landless agricultural laborers and the landlords of the Kama caste. The novel closely examines the relation between the Mala and Madiga community with the upper caste. The Mala community are untouchable agrarian labor caste, and Madiga community are untouchable leather worker caste. The writer has depicted the lives of the Dalit community and their hardships to live a peaceful life in Mangalapuram. The story revolves around a compassionate young man, Sangadas's and his father, Ramadas. His passion to bring about a change within the community forms most part of the narrative. The Indian nationalist movement suffered greatly because of the caste system prevalent in the society. India of the early 20th century was infected with the virus of caste divisions. Till now, the upper class, that is the Brahmins and Kshatriyas, had ruled the lower class of the time, that were the Shudras. Shudras were not made a part of any ritual ceremony of any social gathering. The lower caste were looked down upon by the upper caste during the nationalist movement. Even though they formed the masses and were the major contributors of the movement, the Dalits had contributed during the independence movement. They wanted to build their self-confidence and also to develop their self-identity. Their contribution had not been acknowledged by the upper caste. Dalits had a huge role to play during the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny. Women like Jhalkari Bai were not just part of the movement, but were seen as inspiration to fight against the colonial rule. It had become important for Dalits to assert their identity. Dalits were fighting for their identity and voice. They had been restricted to a geographical space. Beyond that, if they walked, their shadow was considered impure. They were not allowed to enter the temple. The novel was a revolt against the injustices that the Dalit community were fighting against. The novel describes the sufferings of the community. They were not suffering from hunger and poverty. They were fighting against the violence that had been inflicted upon them. The 4,000 endogamous caste and subcaste jatis in Hindu society, each with its own specified hereditary occupations, are divided into 4 Varnas. Outside of these Varnas, the Atishudra subhumans are arranged in hierarchies of their own. The untouchables, the unseeables, the unapproachables, whose presence, whose touch, whose very shadow is considered to be polluting by privileged caste Hindus. Unava Lakshmi Narayan started a college for women at the time when they were being denied education. Ramadas, also another character in the novel, at the end of the novel starts Vijaya College. The college becomes a symbol of development for the Dalits. It is important to study the caste and class structure in Andhra Pradesh to understand the novel further. The novel is a detailed work on the community of Malas and Madigas residing in Malapalli, which is a hamlet for the untouchable. It studies the socio-cultural and economic condition of the Dalit community in Andhra Pradesh during the colonial rule. The literary work was later translated by English by V.V.B. Rao in 2008 by the name Malapalli. And the novel, the author was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and the non-cooperation movement in Andhra Pradesh. The novel represents the miserable lives of Dalit, British administration, and judicial administration. The term Malapalli indicates the theme of the novel, which is literally translated as the untouchable village. The author records the sufferings of the untouchable community in Mangalapuram. The novel's subtitle is titled as Triumph of Sangha. Sangadas is a key figure in the novel. He's a compassionate leader among the Malas who wants an ideal society without caste distinction and racial oppression. The novel has been divided into 4 parts: Sangadas, Ramanayadu, Takelu Jagadu, and Ramadas. The 4 parts revolve around the central figures. Sangadas and Takelu Jagadu are Ramadas's son. Ramanayadu is a friend of Sangadas. Malapalli has in it as much a visionary quality as it has of realism. In this epic, which holds up a mirror to the human condition, there is human truth and there is a human goal. It has hope in it that bestiality and devilry in man would be transformed by stages and grow into humanism. It has a will and desire to cry out against violence. The literary work traces the growth and development of the individual characters and the community. The center of the novel is the struggle of the Dalit community. The work is a violent history and reflects the social and political conditions of people during the pre-independence. Yet the literary work makes reference to the British administration, judicial system, extramarital affair, underground army, political organizations. The writer has addressed the problem of untouchability through the novel. The families living in Mangalapuram had been closely connected with one another. Shishir Kumar Das, in the History of Indian Literature, in one of his volumes, which looks at 1911 to 1956, has written the Telugu novel Malapalli by Unava Lakshmi Narayan deserves special mention it being a faithful record of the life of Harijan family and their unending suffering, as well as the ambivalence of the people towards Gandhiism and their attraction towards the revolutionary tactics, and finally towards organized trade union movements. The conflict in the novel is historical. It was not an individual conflict, but a collective form fighting against the societal norms set by the upper caste. It was an internal conflict. The community wanted to live a new life. The village of Mangalapuram was divided between the upper caste and the lower caste. The novel traces the development of the village through its inhabitants. The name, as the name of the novel suggests, is the theme of the novel. The people residing in this village lead a very simple life. They mostly work on the farms. The novel opens with an introduction to Ramadas's family. He's seen looking up at the sky and simultaneously talking with his daughter Jyoti. The novel records unusual events with the families of Ramadasu and Ramanna Chowdhuria. The first part ends with the protagonist's death, the older brother disappearing, and their father Ramadasu is arrested and sent to a Christian settlement. Ramanna Chowdhuria is responsible for the murder of Sangadas, yet he's not punished for the same. His daughter-in-law disappears with his nephew Mohan Rao. Yet the events do not hamper the lives of Ramadasu. His activism forms most part of the narrative. After Sangadas is killed, Ramadasu's role as an activist forms an important part of the narrative. The novel introduces educational institution as a symbol of progress and positive growth. It is through education the protagonist Sangadas questions the system. The literary work clearly finds a solution as well, unlike many contemporary novels which also dealt on the same issue. Malapalli raises questions on many important issues such as the corrupted British administration, on conversion and zamindari system as well. Towards the end, it is through education and hard work of Ramadasu that justice is prevailed. The novel puts forth the violent history faced by the community. Alturi Murali writes, of all the writings, Unnava Lakshmi Narayan's Telugu novel, Malapalli was the best example of contemporary Gandhian intellectuals' effort to solve the problems of untouchability. This was the first novel in Telugu where a prominent social reformer and nationalist leader tried to come to grips with untouchability, not simply as a moral question, but a political and social problem integral to rural life in Andhra. The writer has portrayed contemporary issues which affected the common people living in the rural parts. Lakshmi Narayan writes in the introduction that it is his first attempt to write in a spoken language. Since the spoken language is different from the written language, which would be more refined by a scholar, he has used the dialect of the people to capture the real essence of the problem and anguish of people living in the village. A term used by Marxist critiques for novels which they claimed reflected social reality, that is, novels which accorded with the Marxist view that the struggle between economic classes is the essential dynamic of society. In its crude version, it served as a term of approbation applied to novels that adhere to the party line by stressing the oppression of workers by bourgeois capitalists, the virtues of the proletariat, and the felicities of life under a communist regime. This novel is an example of social novel, and it Sangadas is a leader of the untouchables living in the village. He represents their problems since he's an educated man and therefore he understands the misery that the community lives through. The novel on one hand studies the Mala community living in the fringes of Mangalapuram, and on the other hand it brings into focus important historical events such as the Panchama conference held in Beswara. In the conference, Sangadas, Ramanaidu, Venkata Reddy and the other men discussed the socio-economic conditions of the fifth caste. The men believed it was important to uplift the fifth caste who for long had been oppressed due to their caste. The aim was to bring a change among the common people who were the worst sufferers. Everyone believed the Sangadas was ideal to be the representative of the movement. Certain resolutions had been prepared and read out by Sangadas in the Panchama conference. This body asks for general education as well as vocational education for all our children as a matter of right. This body recommends that members of our society should have a sense of self-respect and that we should undertake professions like weaving and working with skins and hides to improve the financial conditions. This body urges that arable lands in the forest area should be reserved for the lower caste only. This body requests for monetary help for buying sites and for the construction of houses for the poor. This body requests for an adequate rise in the wages of laborers employed in agricultural operations. The conference was attended by Sangadas and Ramanaidu. The meeting was for the fifth caste. Adi Andhras and Venkata Reddy was its president. The Panchamas were better known as the fifth caste. Sangadas believed that the Hindu society had to be reconstructed. The first four castes of Hinduism, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishyas, and Shudras, were divided according to their profession, and the fifth caste were made to do scavenging and labor work. Sangadas believed that knowledge and expertise were important elements for a profession rather than a caste. The Mala Dasari are a religious Sri Vaishnavite community. Valavu Dasari in Nadu and Holaya Dasari in Karnataka are their synonyms in the neighboring states. Dasari spreads a religious message in the form of hymns or ballads to the masses, or who serves Lord Vishnu by selling black beads, vermilion, turmeric, camphor, coconuts for the worship of the god. In fact, the Dasari must be called religious propagandists rather than religious mendicants. Thurston writes that this community had been recruited from several castes, just Kapur, Balija, Karuba, Boya, and lived by begging from door to door. Malapalli was one of the earliest novels to deal with the uncomfortable theme of caste. The Lakshmi Narayan traces the growth and development, and the novel opens with a description of nature and the relationship shared between man and nature. Ramadas belonged to the Maladasari caste. His ancestors were Vaishnavites. He had settled down with his family, and his older son Venkatadas looked after the fields, where Sangadas worked in Chaudharaya's house. Ramadas would do plowing and owned a few cultivation as well. The other members in the family were Mahalakshmi, Ramadas's wife, his daughter Jyoti, and his nephew Apadas. The other side of the village was occupied by the upper caste Chaudharaya. They lived a prosperous life. Chaudharaya was well versed in business. Sangadas worked for the Chaudharaya. His responsibility was to supervise agricultural work, the sale of produce, and the warehouse. He was paid 15 rupees a month. However, he was confined to a room upstairs. So the novel focuses also on the landowning caste of Nala Bhottus. Malapalli, so it was ironical that the wealthy and prosperous always complained and never lived a fulfilling life, and the poor, despite their despicable and miserable condition, lived as a community. The novel also studies the wage-earning laborers who were being exploited by the government and the poor. Since the laborers were illiterate, they were unable to understand the law and therefore were underpaid and given grains as a daily wage. The principal character of the novel, Ramadas, lives in a village, and and their house was mud roof. Towards the east and south of the house, there were tilled veranda, and it had a spacious front yard. The neem tree that Ramadas's father had planted in wasteland had grown into a huge tree. They had built a poil, which is a narrow space in the porch, at its base, and on top fluttered the saffron flag of Veera Brahman, which is Veera Brahman, who was a sage in the 17th century. He belonged to Andhra Pradesh, known for his poems, Kala Nanam. And his second son had submitted an application for the construction of Ram Mandir, or Ram Temple, and a library in the space under the tree. Jyoti, being the youngest child, everyone was very fond of her. She helped her mother with her household work, as well as looked after the field. She had been brought up with affection and love. Jyoti's cousin Apadas also grew up with her. They developed a liking for each other. She would call him Bhava. Jyoti and Apadas would spend time discussing about classics and poetry. They enjoyed each other's company, taking a whole hour to cover the short distance home. Ramadas and Mahalakshmi were well aware that their daughter liked Apadas. In one such incident, Mahalakshmi asked her about her decision on marriage, to which Jyoti answers, "Where is the man?" In which Mahalakshmi says, "Jokes apart, tell me whether you would like to marry Apadas." Jyoti had taken to a settlement, which was a Christian synagogue. A young boy, Paul, expresses his desire to marry her. Ramanaya Chaudharaya, who belonged to the Nala Bhottukas, they were prosperous and lived a respectful life in the village. Chaudharaya was very well versed in business, and Kantha Raju, his helper, looked after his court matters and funds. A royatwari by profession, Chaudharaya collected taxes from individual cultivators. A strike had carried out against the exorbitant amount of taxes collected by Chaudharaya. Since they had the money, they would lend the money to the poor, and gradually they started owning the village. The lower caste became their laborers. The right had been given the British the power to collect taxes. The cultivators had stopped their cultivation, and for a long time the strike had continued. After his father's death, the family owned 200 acres of wet and 100 acres of dry land. From the time Chaudharaya became the head, he enlarged the extent of his holdings by acquiring land at cheap rates, taking away land while collecting old dues, and by taking advantage of court auctions. He acquired about 500 acres of wet and 300 of dry land, and increased his ledger of loans to the public to about 3 lakhs. Sangadas worked as a hired labor for Ramana Chaudhary, and the northern room in Chaudharaya's house was reserved for Sangadas. Sangadas shared an intimate friendship with Chaudharaya's son, Rama Naidu, and their friendship was, however, not accepted by Chaudharaya. The subtitle of Malapalli's Triumph of Sangha, Sangadas's self-sacrifice, leads to the establishment of Vijaya College and Sanghapeetham. The college becomes a symbol of progress and growth for the Mala community. Education played a very important role in the novel. Ramanaidu and Sangadas attend a lot of political meetings at Vijayawada. The author shows the urban links of the rural movements and also the spread of new political perceptions and ideologies among peasants living in the village. Here, the author explains his notion or theory of solving the untouchables problem by using the Gandhian non-violent consensus philosophy. This also explains the awareness of different contemporary political ideologies among the nationalist intelligentsia in Andhra in the 1920s and their firm commitment to foster the ideas conducive for bourgeois social development. They were invited to attend the Andhra Convention on Bezawara. The purpose of this convention was to address the issues of untouchables. The president of the convention was Rameshwar Rao and Sangadas. Some resolutions were passed at the conventions. Once Sangadas returns back to his village, he urges the laborers to go on a strike and demand higher wages. This created anger amongst the landlord. One such landlord was, of course, Chaudharaya, whose son Ramanaidu, who shared a very intimate friendship with Sangadas, also attended the political meeting. The untouchables had thoroughly spoiled his son. He wouldn't be able to function unless he was rid of his influence. He also needed to advise Ramanaidu about taking up a responsible job that would keep the young man totally occupied. Ramana Chaudharaya was accused of murdering Sangadas. There was no sense of guilt in him. Chaudharaya says in one of the parts in the novel, in the cow shed, I beat that untouchable to death. Go quickly and have him buried in the mountain. When the untouchables come to know of Sangadas's murder, they came to threaten and attack him. His wife Lakshmana closed the main entrance to escape the violent attack. When the inspector asked Ramadas the cause of Sangadas's death, his father humbly answered, he passed away when his time on earth came to an end. How else? The inspector closed the matter by stating that Sangadas had died of some disease-related issues. Everyone decided to commemorate his death by starting Sangada Peetham. It had been decided that the Peetham would be inaugurated on the last day of the funeral rites. Those who had supported the fifth caste movement started sending donations for the center. Religious leaders had come. Rameshwara Garu from Bezawara had come for the inauguration ceremony. He donated 500 rupees. Chaudharaya's most trusted accomplice, Kanta Raju, had threatened the Brahmins who attended the celebration would be declared untouchable and the Brahmins who fed them would be excommunicated. Sangapeetham had been established and Venkata Reddy was declared to be its president. He believed that the movement was a religious ritual. It was a sacred movement. After the ceremony, everybody returned back home. Rangadas engaged himself in teaching students free of cost. He believed serving others was the greatest virtue. Appadas also kept himself involved in teaching laborers. Arrangements had been made to provide books and periodicals free of cost and for readers. Though Ramanaidu never came to his place, he gave away all his books as a gift to the library there. Chaudharaya was still hiding inside his house after murdering Sangadas. His house had confined him. Children had grown scared of him. They felt he would kill them as well. As he thought deeply, these untouchable insects now have the power to insult even people like me. Sangadas is killed by Chaudharaya at the end of the first phase. His death was seen as a beginning of a revolution. In the second phase of the novel, Ramanaidu, after Sangadas's death, his work is carried forward by Ramanaidu. Ramanaidu would address processions carried by Dalits. He worked for the upliftment of the Dalits. He would explain about the need of education, how poverty had become an issue to tackle with. People sang devotional songs. As seen in the last section, Lakshmi Narayan had divided the novel in 4 parts. Venkata Dasu represents the third part of the novel starts with an introduction to Thakele Jagadu. Venkata Dasu represents a stream of radical views in solving the problems of Panchamas. It was he who advocated direct confrontation with the landlords. Yet this character turns into a bandit. The implication is that the radical ideas which might lead to direct confrontation between the landlords and laborers due to a class question involved would ultimately end up as a social banditry and are not able to create or develop into an alternative paradigm of solving the social contradictions. The only proper path to follow is the Gandhian model of change through consensus and also through internal cultural reform. I think I don't have too much time. Can you just tell me how much time do I have left?
So it's almost time because we have 20 minutes only for questions and something to conclude at least.
Okay. So I'll just finish this bit and then I'll just finish this. Ramadas decides to start weaving. He approaches Subha Shetty for work, who agrees to keep him. Ramadas leaves the city, and that is when he's approached by three men who tell him about Thakalu Jagadu, who work for the poor and wanted to make the lives of the poor better. The men asked him to give the clothes which Ramadas was carrying, for which they would pay him. Ramadas had clothes worth 200 rupees, but these men agreed to pay him 400. After returning home, Ramadas handed the entire amount to Subha Shetty. Subha Shetty, instead of giving him 200 rupees, gave him 30 rupees as a profit to Ramadas, and this had been discussed between the two. However, some robbers came the same night in Subha Shetty's house and robbed his house. Even the police couldn't do much. So Venkata Das disappears soon after his brother Sangadas's death. For a while, there is no mention of him. And then all of a sudden, the writer makes a reference of a guerrilla, a group of men fighting with a large group of policemen. Thakalu Jagadu is portrayed as someone who's violent and has adopted the non-violent form to fight the powerful people. He was fondly called Thakalu Jagadu by the members of his group. The rich and the wealthy businessmen, land-owning class, were terrorized by the name. The newspaper carried articles showing the incompetence of the police, who were unable to capture Jagadu. He became popular among the poor. His motive was to make sure that nobody remains hungry or suffer humiliation. Unlike Sangadas, Ramadas, who are portrayed as peaceful and believer of non-violence, or Ahimsa, Thakalu Jagadu is different. Ironically, the real Thakalu Jagadu is dead, according to the police records, and Venkata Das takes up the name and goes underground. I just finished the conclusion bit, and then because I don't have too much time here, so the literary work ends with many disappointments and achievements. Lakshmi Narayan presents a literary work where one's life goal cannot be achieved with an easy path. Deaths, humiliation, suffering, agony, poverty have been portrayed in the work. Ramadas experiences all to attain salvation in the end. His life becomes an example of inspiration, whose belief in God kept him going. After his son's death and losing everything, he did not for once lose faith in God. Sangadas dreamt of Vijaya College, but Ramadas fulfilled it. Ramadas's desire to continue the fight till the end was kept alive by his perseverance. Once Vijaya College begins, Ramadas continues weaving and wore saffron clothes. He would wander in the hills and caves. One can say that he became one with God. Malapalli documents the sufferings. They were ghettoized to the exterior part of the village, and their path is known as Malapalli. The Village of the Untouchables, the title in itself implicitly explains the thematic structure of the novel. The novel, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. So
it was too long.
Has been taken a long time. I think that our participants have just understood something. So this is time for question and response or answers. So I would like to notice that due to the time, we will receive at least 2 persons if the time will allow us. And I would like also to notice to today's speaker, during the question, you can try to summarize to give the most important details about, you understand, because of time. We are very sorry. Okay, so we open the floor for questions.
So let me begin. This is Professor Bruce.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Let me begin by saying how much I appreciated the approach and appreciated hearing so much about this pivotal novel, Malapalli. I had several questions about it. One, I would just like to say in terms of presentation, while there was a very close reading of the text, it would have been helpful to have had some summary at the beginning before one went through each of the sections of it. Because even though I was slightly familiar with the book, I found myself getting lost in the detail of each one of the sections. So in terms of presentation, I would just ask students in future presentations to maybe give a little bit more, Sharonee, to give a little bit more time for your listener to absorb the rich detail of what you're explaining. So apart from the speed of it and the vast material you covered, I had 2 questions, one of which is the novel itself keeps referring to poetry, and in terms of genre, and I've read, of course, some other things about Telugu society, poetry was much more important than novel writing. So the role of poetry in Unnava Lakshmi Narayan's outlook as a socialist and with the use of poetry apart from the novel, but poetry in the novel itself, I think would be important. And then in terms of your own background, something that I raise as a question is that when I was trying to find out more about the novel, I realized that Professor Kesavan Kumar from Delhi University had written extensively about this And I wonder if you also, because you said you did this work 6 years ago, had some contact with him, and that was part of the reason why you picked this topic.
No, I was not in touch with him. So in fact, when I started working on this novel, I could not find anything. And my advisor, Dr. K. Premanathan, had told me that it's very hard to get literature on this novel. This is also like one of the first novels that was written on the issue of untouchability, right? And it was translated much later. In fact, it was very hard to get a copy of this text. So I had to, he had told me explicitly that probably the only place that you could find a copy of this text would be Sahitya Academy. And there was only one copy available. So it was actually very difficult to get hold of any material on the novel. And I do realize that the novel has many characters, and therefore it becomes, it's actually, I should have spoken about the characters right at the beginning, because the novel is divided into 4 phases, and each after like the major characters in the novel, right? The son, the father, and then the son, and then, yeah, the friend. So, yeah, I know that the novel has like a huge number of characters.
And what about the role of poetry?
So Naval Lakshmi Narayan was, of course, very deeply inspired by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and other poets, Kandukuri, Veerasalingam, and all of them. But I don't really look into too much of poetry in the novel. I only focused more on the novel, on the writing.
So can you tell us, sorry, just a quick question. Can you tell us what the reception was? Did you hear me?
Yeah,
Please,
of course.
can you repeat?
Yeah, I'm curious to know what the reception for this novel is. And you talk about translation, but we don't know into which language.
So it was translated from Telugu to English. And so the novel was written in 1922, but it was translated in 2008. So it was translated way after the original work had actually been published.
So can you tell us a little bit about the publication? So I gathered that it was written in prison. So how did it get published, and who read it, and why was it translated if it was so hard to find?
So this was written during his time in prison, the author's time in prison, and his friend actually had published it in 1922, and then a part of it was translated in February and March of 1923 as well. And it was important to translate it in English because, as I said, it's considered to be an epic because this is one of the earliest novels, or some even say that this is probably the first novel that actually depicted the lives of the untouchable. And Malapalli literally means the village of the Malas, which were one of the lowest caste of the time. And the whole novel centers around the theme of the Malas. So that is why it was so essential to translate it, the book. And it was translated almost like 90 years later.
But what was the reception?
Yeah, even I wanted to ask you whether if it was ever banned, because most prison writings are problematic. Either they are banned or burnt, or the publication is somehow, thwarted. So was it ever banned by any ruling party?
No, it wasn't banned, but I think that bit I really don't know because there hasn't been much spoken about that. But I'm assuming that because it came out at a time when this author was not really conforming to the ideas, he was against many things, and he was speaking out for women's education. He was speaking for the untouchables, and that could be one of the reasons why it took so long to become what it turned out to be, because he was a revolutionary author at the time.
Good. So the last question, if there is a last question for concluding this session today. If there is no, I have one.
Yeah, but I have to say this as well. The author used to dictate bits of the novel to his friend, right? And they got it published at their own expense. The friends got it published at their own expense, right? And the first printed copy came out in November, December of 1922. And then later, the second bit was printed in February and March of 1923.
Okay, so maybe that's why it was easier for them to get published.
Yeah, because they did it on
they did, yeah, on their own. Yeah, so they didn't have to find any publisher or face any rejections for that matter.
Yeah.
So thank you for that information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the last question is mine. Sharon, I have to ask you one question. We know well that Indian society, as you have said in your presentation, is characterized by the problem about, as you have mentioned, untouchability and the caste discrimination, something which is similar with Africa. But in Africa, we have tribalism. You find that the most of problem that Africa is affecting is about the tribes, because we have many tribes. So those can be the source of the problem in our continent. So I'm not well specialized in the problem of India, but I would like to know something about it. So can we say that the problem about caste discrimination and untouchability, as you said, or it was said in the novel, there is any connection that can impact development, to mean social development in India? Question of caste discrimination and untouchability, have it impact in social development?
It can impact the social development, of course, because, and also with the current government, we are seeing more number of, caste-based atrocities that are happening against Dalits, right? And also how different castes are, their occupation is also based on the caste, right? We constantly hear how the untouchables are made to do manual scavenging work, and there is so many deaths that go unrecorded every year. So how the Dalits are not being uplifted in society, right? And this has been increasing over the since the beginning of independence movement, right? And we see that how Dalit students, there is reservation in education system, but even then, when there is, they're not being, they're not being encouraged to study, and how even, when it comes to jobs, whether it's in university, whether it's in school, we see that there is one position that comes out when it comes to, when it is in the post of a SC, scheduled caste, right? Or in the post of a scheduled tribe. And there are so many posts for the upper caste. So of course, when they're not being uplifted, it is creating a whole hierarchy, and it does impact the development.
Yeah. So can we conclude that the power structure has big impact in Indian society to get the sustainable development?
Yes,
something
there is.
which,
yeah.
Something which is similar with African society, because we know well that a lot of problems happen to tribal, because if this tribal is in power, other tribal is in trouble. So I would like to know if there is any relation in India society. So what I have to know is that this novel is more interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there is a last intervention for concluding, you have the floor.
I would like to add one thing here, Matisu. Since you asked about the interrelation between caste and tribalism in Africa, caste in India and tribalism in Africa, both are actually colonial constructs. The caste hierarchy has been accelerated by the colonizers in India, just like tribal problems or tribal hierarchies have been accelerated by the British, by the colonizers in Africa as well. So yeah, they are both deeply rooted in the process of colonization.
And I just want to add one thing, like, as people are getting more educated, I feel the society is getting more backward when it comes to the Indian society, right? There is much more, the social fabric of the country is being destroyed every single day, as we all know it. And I think caste discrimination is becoming more wider. right? This sort of hatred that is growing towards Dalits or towards the minorities in the country are just becoming bigger and bigger every single day. And there are continuous incidents that we hear of where Dalits are being attacked, where the minorities of the country are being attacked. I mean, just recently I read a news from India where a Dalit man had a mustache and he attended his wedding and he was killed for it in India. So, it's not said, and it's not something that a mustache can only be something that an upper caste man is supposed to have. When a Dalit man decides to have that, or he rides a horse to his wedding, he's going to be attacked and beaten up for that. So definitely the caste discrimination is a colonial construct, right? And it exists like in all spheres of our society, right? From job to education to even like everything, it exists. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. So I see that the debate seemed to be very interesting. Unfortunately, time cannot allow us. So we give the last floor to Mr. Rajib to add something before we finish our today's session. Rajib?
Yes, thank you very much. Professor Mariam wants to say something first.
Yeah.
I was just going to wish everybody a Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramadan Kareem. We have Professor Mosmi here, Professor Sajade. Thank you very much for joining. And unfortunately, we do not have much time today to.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
very interesting indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. And so I just wanted to say that we'll be continuing our discussions. So, I mean, so far we have seen, like, to understand the whole notion of identity, and we'll be having our discussion in coming days as well. So please stay tuned. We have 2 projects that we are working on: Umran Academic Research Association and Umran Women's Magazine. If you have some contribution you want to publish in the magazine, you can share your work. And we have a team working on that, and we will be publishing quarterly this magazine. So Professor Mariam, yes, please.
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, Umran is a co-sponsor of a conference that I'm organizing this week. So on Thursday the 7th and Friday the 8th, there will be a conference on the works of Nawal Saadawi, the Egyptian activist writer who died a year ago. And she was also a physician, a psychiatrist. So there will be a panel on Thursday that deals with her as an activist physician. And then on Friday, there will be a panel on her as a writer. But I think that both days will be of great interest to everyone in Umran. And thank you, Rajiv, for being a co-sponsor. We're delighted that you will be with us this week.
Sure, for sure. Thank you very much. I was supposed to tell that. Thank you very much. And yes, and I mean, you can be part of Umran Academic Research Associations to expand and work and to expand, educate people the way you actually studying to do that, to achieve that. So we have the common values and common ideas that we are working for. We can achieve only when we come together to achieve it. So thank you once again, Professor Mariam, for moderating this session, and Sharonee for wonderful presentation, Professor Bruce for joining, and Professor Mosmi and Professor Sajade. Thank you very much, Mateso, for hosting the program. Thank you, Fatma, for organizing this whole sessions on identity series of talks. Thank you, Swasti, for support. See you again, and happy Ramadan. Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, happy Ramadan to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Happy Ramadan.
Thank you. Happy Ramadan to you as well.
Okay, so this is the end of today's session.